Morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Ouagadougou as Captain Ibrahim Traoré's convoy approached the central hospital.
It was an unannounced visit, the kind that revealed the true state of public institutions. The young leader of Burkina Faso had made such surprise inspections his trademark, believing that real change came from witnessing reality firsthand, not from sanitized reports delivered in air-conditioned offices. As the vehicles came to a halt, Traoré stepped out, his military fatigues crisp despite the early hour. The hospital's facade told a story of neglect and underfunding. Cracked walls, broken windows hastily covered with cardboard, and a garden that had long surrendered to drought. This was the reality his people faced daily, and it was why he had dedicated his life to transformation. The hospital director, Dr. Sankara, rushed out to greet him, clearly flustered by the unexpected arrival.
Captain Traoré, what an honor!
If we had known you were coming, we would have prepared. That's exactly why I didn't announce it, Traoré interrupted gently but firmly. I want to see how things really are, not how they appear when you're expecting an inspection. As they walked through the entrance, the smell hit him first, a mixture of disinfectant barely masking the underlying odors of overcrowding and inadequate ventilation. The waiting room was packed with patients, some sitting on plastic chairs that had seen better days, others on the floor, their faces etched with pain and resignation. "How many patients do you handle daily?" Traoré asked, his observant eyes taking in every detail. "On average, about 300, Dr. Sankara replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But we're equipped for maybe half that number. Our staff does their best, but the resources..." They moved deeper into the hospital, passing through corridors where patients lined the walls on makeshift beds. Traoré stopped frequently, speaking with patients, asking about their experiences, their wait times, their treatment. Each conversation reinforced what he already knew: the healthcare system was failing his people. In the pediatric ward, the situation was even more heartbreaking. Children lay in beds too big for their small frames, some crying softly, others staring at the ceiling with eyes that seemed too old for their age. It was here that Traoré first noticed her. She was mopping the floor near the children's beds, moving with practiced efficiency but remarkable gentleness. Unlike other cleaning staff who worked mechanically, this woman, she appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair tied back in a colorful head wrap, paused at each bed. She would adjust a blanket here, whisper something comforting there, or simply place a gentle hand on a child's forehead. What struck Traoré most was how the children responded to her. Even the sickest ones would manage a small smile when she approached. She had a way of moving that was both purposeful and caring, as if cleaning the hospital wasn't just her job, but her calling. "Who is that woman?" Traoré asked Dr. Sankara quietly. The doctor followed his gaze. "Oh, that's Fatima. She's been with us for over 15 years. One of our most dedicated employees. The children adore her." Traoré watched as Fatima knelt beside a bed where a young boy, perhaps 7 years old, lay motionless. She began speaking to him in Moor, their local language, her voice so soft that Traoré had to strain to hear. The boy's eyes fluttered open, and for the first time since Traoré had entered the ward, he saw a genuine smile on a child's face. "She has children of her own?" Traoré inquired.
Dottore Sankara's expression grew complicated.
That's a story best told by her. But I will say this: Fatima understands loss and love in ways that few people do. The cryptic response intrigued Traoré. As they continued the tour, he found his attention repeatedly drawn back to the cleaning woman. There was something about her presence that seemed to transform the atmosphere wherever she worked. Nurses moved more gently around her, doctors nodded respectfully when they passed, and patients seemed calmer in her vicinity. They spent the next hour touring the surgical wing, the maternity ward, and the emergency room. Each area revealed new problems: outdated equipment, shortage of medicines, overworked staff. But in each section, Traoré noticed, Fatima's influence was evident. The floors were cleaner, yes, but more than that, there was an intangible sense of dignity maintained despite the challenging conditions. In the maternity ward, Traoré witnessed something that stopped him in his tracks. A young mother, barely out of her teens, was crying silently as she held her newborn. The baby was clearly premature, and the incubators were all occupied. Fatima approached the young woman, set down her cleaning supplies, and without a word, began fashioning a makeshift warming bed using towels and a heat lamp she had somehow procured. "She shouldn't be doing that," Dr. Sankara whispered nervously. "It's outside her job description." But Traoré held up a hand to silence him. He watched as Fatima carefully helped the mother position the baby in the improvised incubator, all while speaking to her in gentle, reassuring tones. The transformation in the young mother was immediate, the despair in her eyes replaced by hope, the panic in her breathing settling into something more manageable. This woman, Traoré thought to himself, understands something fundamental about healing that goes beyond medicine. As they moved toward the hospital's administrative offices, Traoré made a decision. "I'd like to speak with Fatima. Privately." Dr. Sankara looked uncomfortable. "Captain, I'm not sure that's necessary. She's just a cleaning lady." "No one is just anything," Traoré cut him off sharply. "And from what I've observed, she might be one of the most important people in this hospital." They found Fatima in a small supply closet, organizing cleaning materials with the same methodical care she brought to everything else. When Dr. Sankara told her that Captain Traoré wanted to speak with her, her eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been worry. "Am I in trouble?" she asked in French, her accent thick but her words clear. "On the contrary," Traoré replied, switching to more to put her at ease. "I wanted to thank you for what you do here. I've been watching, and I can see that you care for these patients as if they were your own family." Fatima's hands, weathered from years of hard work, twisted nervously in her apron. "I just do my job, Captain." "Do you?" "Because what I saw in the pediatric ward, in the maternity ward, that went far beyond cleaning floors." For a moment, something flickered across Fatima's face, a mixture of pride and pain that Traoré couldn't quite decipher. She gestured to a small wooden stool, and Traoré, despite Dr. Sankara's visible discomfort, sat down. "Captain," Fatima began, her voice taking on a quality that suggested she was about to share something significant, "I have worked in this hospital for 15 years. I have seen thousands of children pass through these doors. Some go home healthy and happy. Others—" She paused, her eyes growing distant. "Others become angels too soon." Traoré leaned forward, sensing that this conversation was about to reveal something important. "But every child who comes here, they are all somebody's precious one. They are all deserving of love, of dignity, of hope. So yes, I clean the floors, I empty the waste bins, I scrub the walls. But I also try to clean away a little bit of their fear, to empty their hearts of despair, to scrub away the feeling that they are forgotten." The raw honesty in her words struck Traoré deeply. This was the kind of leadership, quiet, service-oriented, transformative, that his country desperately needed at every level. "You speak like someone who has known loss," he observed gently. Fatima's composure, which had been steady until now, began to crack. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. She stared at it for a long moment before handing it to Traoré. The photograph showed a much younger Fatima holding a baby, both of them radiating joy. But there was something about the image, the hospital gown Fatima was wearing, the medical equipment visible in the background, that suggested this wasn't a typical baby photo. "Her name was Aisha," Fatima whispered. "She was born 3 months early, weighing less than a kilogram. The doctors said she wouldn't survive the night." Traoré studied the photograph more closely. The baby was incredibly small, but what struck him most was the expression on young Fatima's face. It was the same look of fierce, protective love he had seen her direct toward the children in the ward today. "But she did survive," he said, though something in Fatima's tone suggested the story didn't have a happy ending. For 18 months. 18 beautiful, precious months. Fatima's voice was barely audible now. She couldn't walk, could barely speak, but she had the most beautiful smile. Every morning when I would get ready for work, she would clap her little hands and say, "Mama, go help babies." The silence in the small closet was profound. Dr. Sankara, who had been shifting uncomfortably throughout the conversation, seemed to shrink into the background. "The irony," Fatima continued, "was that I started working here because of her medical bills. I needed the job to pay for her treatments. But she understood, even as young as she was, that the work was important. She used to tell people that her mama was a doctor who made children feel better." Traoré felt a tightness in his chest. He had experienced loss himself, friends in military operations, family members to disease and poverty. But there was something about a mother's grief that touched a different part of the soul. "Pneumonia," Fatima said simply. Her lungs were never strong. One winter, she caught a cold that her little body just couldn't fight off. I brought her here, to this hospital. The same doctors and nurses who had watched her grow up tried everything, but... She reached out and gently took the photograph back from Traoré, her fingers tracing the image of her daughter's face. "She died in my arms in the pediatric ward. Room 107. Dr. Sankara was there. He was just a young resident then. He cried with me." Traoré glanced at the hospital director, who was indeed wiping tears from his eyes. "After the funeral," Fatima continued, "I didn't know what to do with myself. The apartment felt empty. My days had no purpose. I had taken leave from work, and people expected me to quit entirely. But after 3 weeks, I came back." "Why?" Traoré asked, though he was beginning to understand. "Because Aisha was right. This is where I help babies. This is where I can honor her memory. Every child I comfort, every floor I clean so that their environment is a little healthier, every small act of kindness I can offer, it's all for her." The story was powerful enough, but Traoré sensed there was more. Something in Fatima's manner suggested that losing Aisha wasn't the end of her story, but perhaps the beginning of another chapter. "Fatima," he said carefully, "Dr. Sankara mentioned that you understand loss and love in special ways. Is there more you'd like to share?" She was quiet for so long that Traoré wondered if he had overstepped. But then she stood up, smoothed her apron, and said, "Captain, would you like to meet my son?" The question caught him completely off guard. "Your son?" "Not the son I gave birth to," she clarified quickly.
But de son uno cose. Ce sont ou choses me.
Dr. Sankara looked as surprised as Traoré felt. "Fatima, I didn't know you had." "It's not something I talk about at work," she explained. "But if Captain Traoré is interested in understanding how this hospital really works, how healing really happens, then perhaps it's time." Intrigued and moved by her story so far, Traoré nodded. "I would be honored to meet your son." Fatima led them through a maze of corridors to a door marked Staff Education Center. She knocked gently before opening it. "Maman Fatima," came a voice from inside, and Traoré heard the scraping of a chair being pushed back. They entered to find a young man, perhaps 17 or 18 years old, standing by a desk covered with textbooks and papers. He was tall and lean, with intelligent eyes and a smile that lit up the entire room when he saw Fatima. "Jean-Baptiste," Fatima said, her voice filled with unmistakable maternal pride, "I'd like you to meet Captain Traoré." The young man's eyes widened in recognition, and he immediately straightened into a respectful posture. "Captain." "It's an honor, sir." But what struck Traoré most was the interaction between Fatima and Jean-Baptiste. The way she looked at him, the way he moved toward her for a brief embrace, the comfortable familiarity between them. This was clearly a mother and son, regardless of biology. "Jean-Baptiste is in his final year of secondary school," Fatima explained, her pride evident. He's hoping to study medicine. Medicine. Traoré looked at the textbooks on the desk, advanced biology, chemistry, mathematics. That's ambitious. It's been his dream since he was small, Fatima said. He wants to be a pediatric surgeon. Tell me, Traoré said, settling into a chair, how did you two find each other? Fatima and Jean-Baptiste exchanged a look that spoke of shared memories and deep affection. I was 8 years old, Jean-Baptiste began, living on the streets near the market. My parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, and I had been moving from one relative to another, but no one really wanted another mouth to feed. Traoré had heard too many stories like this. Children orphaned by tragedy, abandoned by poverty, left to fend for themselves in a society that barely had resources for its adults. I got very sick, Jean-Baptiste continued. Malaria, I think, though I wasn't sure at the time. I just knew I felt like I was dying. Someone, I never found out who, brought me to the hospital emergency room and left me there. Fatima picked up the story. It was about 6 months after Aisha died. I was working the night shift because I couldn't sleep anyway. Around midnight, this little boy was brought in, unconscious, burning with fever. The emergency room was overcrowded, as usual, and he was placed on a gurney in the hallway. I remember waking up and seeing this lady in a cleaning uniform mopping around my bed, Jean-Baptiste said, smiling at the memory. But she wasn't just mopping. She was humming this song, very softly, and every few minutes she would touch my forehead to check my fever. He was so small, Fatima said, her voice growing tender.
And so alone.
No one came to visit, no one asked about him. After 3 days, when his fever broke and he was conscious, I asked him about his family. I told her I didn't have any family, Jean-Baptiste said. I expected her to just nod and move on, like everyone else did. But instead, she sat down next to my bed and said, "Well, now you do." The simple statement hung in the air, and Traoré felt something shift inside his chest. This was the kind of story that reminded him why he had dedicated his life to serving his country, why the work of transformation was so crucial. What happened next? He asked. Maman Fatima visited me every day during her shifts, Jean-Baptiste said. She would bring me extra food from the cafeteria, help me with reading, I could barely read at the time, and tell me stories about her daughter. The adoption process, getting the legal papers in order, proving that Maman Fatima could support another child on her cleaning salary, it took almost 2 years, Jean-Baptiste added. 2 years. Traoré was astonished. You waited 2 years? She visited me every single day for 2 years, Jean-Baptiste said, his voice filled with awe. Even when I was placed in a children's home across the city, she would take 2 buses after her shift ended to come see me. She would help me with homework, bring me books, and always remind me that she was working to bring me home. Fatima shrugged as if her actions had been the most natural thing in the world. He was my son from the moment I decided he was my son. The paperwork was just making it official. Traoré looked around the small room, taking in the details. On the walls were certificates, Jean-Baptiste's academic achievements, community service awards, recognition for various school projects. But mixed among them were more personal items. Photographs of Fatima and Jean-Baptiste at school events, a drawing showing a woman and a boy holding hands, and in a place of honor, the photograph of baby Aisha. I remember the day the papers were finally approved, Jean-Baptiste said. Maman Fatima came to the children's home with this huge smile and a small suitcase. I had never owned a suitcase before. I had always carried my few belongings in a plastic bag. He pointed to a corner where an old, worn suitcase sat. She had cleaned out the room where Aisha used to sleep and turned it into a study space for me. There was a desk and shelves for books, and on the wall she had hung a photograph of Aisha. I told him that Aisha would have loved having a big brother, Fatima said softly, and that I thought she would be happy knowing that her room was being used to help someone learn and grow. I was scared at first, Jean-Baptiste admitted. I had never had a room of my own, never had someone who expected me to succeed rather than just survive. But Maman Fatima was patient. The biggest challenge, Fatima said, was that Jean-Baptiste didn't believe he deserved good things. He would apologize for everything, for eating too much food, for needing new shoes, for getting good grades. I had learned to make myself invisible, Jean-Baptiste explained. On the streets, being noticed was usually dangerous. So when Maman Fatima would celebrate my achievements, I didn't know how to respond. Time and consistency, Fatima said simply. Every day, I would tell him that he belonged in our family, that his successes made me proud, that his presence in my life was a gift, not a burden. Tell me about your dream to study medicine, Traoré said to Jean-Baptiste. The young man's face became serious. It started here, in this hospital. During those 2 years when the adoption was being processed, I spent a lot of time here with Maman Fatima. I would do my homework while she worked, and I began to notice things.
What kind of things?
I noticed that healing isn't just about medicine and equipment. I watched Maman Fatima, and I saw that sometimes the most important treatment was simply seeing patients as human beings worthy of dignity and care. Her answers taught me that medicine is as much about compassion as it is about science, Jean-Baptiste continued. I want to be a pediatric surgeon because I want to help children the way this hospital and Maman Fatima helped me. Surgery is expensive to study, Traoré noted. Yes, Jean-Baptiste acknowledged. That's why I've been working to earn scholarships. My grades are good, and I've been volunteering in the community. But even with scholarships, it will be challenging. We'll find a way, Fatima said determinedly.
I've been saving every extra franc I can.
His education is the most important investment I can make. A gentle knock interrupted them. A nurse peered in, looking flustered. Excuse me, Fatima, but we have a situation in the pediatric ward. There's a little girl who was just admitted, and she's terrified. Dr. Quadio wondered if you might help. Fatima was already standing. Of course. As they made their way back to the pediatric ward, the nurse explained that a 4-year-old girl had been brought in after a serious fall. She had a broken arm and possible internal injuries, but she was so frightened that medical staff couldn't examine her properly. When they entered the ward, Traoré could see the chaos. A small girl was pressed against the wall in a corner bed, her eyes wide with terror. Her left arm was clearly broken, and there were scratches and bruises on her face and legs. Around her, other children were crying in sympathy or fear. Where are her parents? Fatima asked quietly. They're arguing in the hallway about whose fault the accident was, Dr. Sankara replied. Their voices were making the situation worse. Fatima surveyed the scene, then made quiet requests for a chair, warm water, soft cloths, and fruit juice. She approached the frightened child slowly, making no sudden movements. Hello, little one.
My name is Fatima, she said softly in Moor.
I work here in the hospital, and I'm here to help make sure you feel safe. The child didn't respond, but her crying quieted slightly. I can see that your arm hurts, and I can see that you're scared. This is a big place with lots of strangers, and that can be frightening. Slowly, the child's rigid posture began to relax. I have a son who used to be scared of hospitals too. His name is Jean-Baptiste, and when he was not much older than you, he had to stay in a hospital bed just like this one. Jean-Baptiste stepped forward, close enough to be visible but not threatening. Hello, he said gently. Maman Fatima is right. I was very scared when I first came to the hospital. But I learned that the people here want to help. For the first time, the little girl wasn't crying. Her eyes moved between Fatima and Jean-Baptiste. Your arm needs to be looked at by the doctor, Fatima explained, and I know that might seem scary. But what if I stayed right here with you while they examine it? Would that help? The child nodded almost imperceptibly. Over the next 30 minutes, Traoré watched a masterclass in compassionate care. Fatima never left the child's side, explaining each step in simple terms, distracting her with gentle stories, and providing constant reassurance. When it was necessary to set the broken bone, she held the child's good hand and sang a traditional lullaby. Jean-Baptiste proved equally valuable, fetching items as needed and engaging the child in simple games that kept her mind off the medical procedures. Most importantly, Traoré noticed how Fatima's approach affected the entire ward. The other children stopped crying and began watching with interest. The medical staff worked more calmly and efficiently. Even the arguing voices from the hallway gradually quieted. When the immediate crisis was resolved and the little girl was resting comfortably with her arm in a cast, Fatima turned her attention to the parents in the hallway. Traoré positioned himself where he could observe. The parents, a young couple who looked exhausted and stressed, were standing apart from each other, their body language suggesting ongoing conflict.
Are you Adama's parents?
Fatima asked, approaching them with calm presence. The woman nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. Will she be okay? The doctors say she will heal completely, Fatima assured them. But she needs both of you to be strong for her right now. The man, who had been staring at the floor, looked up. This is my fault. I should have been watching her more carefully. And I should have told her not to climb so high, the woman added, her voice breaking. We've been fighting about it for hours. Fatima was quiet for a moment, then said, When my daughter was sick, I used to blame myself for everything. Every medication that didn't work, every night she couldn't sleep. I was sure it was because I had failed her somehow. The parents looked at her with interest, recognizing the voice of someone who had experienced similar pain. But I learned that blame doesn't heal anyone, Fatima continued. Love does. Action does. Being present does. Your daughter needs you to work together, not to tear yourselves apart with guilt. The simple wisdom seemed to reach both parents. The woman moved closer to her husband, and he put his arm around her shoulders.
She is so small, the woman whispered, when he saw her fall.
But she's strong, Fatima said firmly. And she's lucky to have parents who love her enough to bring her here, who care enough to worry about her. Focus on that. By the time they returned to the education center, the parents had reconciled and were sitting together by their daughter's bedside, taking turns reading to her from a picture book that Jean-Baptiste had found. How do you do that? Traoré asked as they walked.
Bring peace to chaos. Transform fear into calm.
I think it's because I understand that everyone who comes to this hospital is fighting a battle, Fatima replied. The patients, the families, even the medical staff, we're all struggling with something. And when you're fighting a battle, what you need most is to know that you're not fighting alone. Back in the education center, Traoré found himself seeing both Fatima and Jean-Baptiste with new eyes. This wasn't just a touching story of adoption and resilience. This was a living example of the kind of leadership and transformation that Burkina Faso needed. Jean-Baptiste, he said, what have you learned from watching your mother work? The young man thought carefully. I've learned that real power isn't about having authority over people. It's about having the ability to serve them effectively. Maman Fatima has no official position of leadership in this hospital, but her influence touches every corner of it. And I've learned that the most important healing often happens not through grand gestures, but through small, consistent acts of kindness and dignity. Traoré nodded, thinking about his own role as a leader. Fatima, he said, I have a proposition for you. Both Fatima and Jean-Baptiste looked at him with curiosity. I've been thinking about healthcare reform in our country. We have many hospitals with similar challenges to what I've seen here today. But what we lack is not just better equipment or more money. What we lack is the kind of culture that you've helped create here. He paused, organizing his thoughts. I would like to invite you to help us develop training programs for hospital staff across the country. Not technical training, but training in the human aspects of healthcare, in creating environments where healing can happen at every level. Fatima was quiet for a long moment, clearly surprised by the proposal. "Captain," she said finally, "I'm honored that you would consider me for such a role. But I'm not sure I'm the right person. I don't have formal credentials." "But you have something much more valuable," Traoré interrupted. "You have proven results. I've seen how your approach transforms patient care, staff morale, and family outcomes." Jean-Baptiste was listening with obvious excitement. "Maman Fatima, this could be an incredible opportunity to share what you've learned with healthcare workers throughout the country." "But it would mean leaving this hospital," Fatima said. "This is my home. These are my people." "What if it didn't have to be either or?" Traoré suggested. "What if we structured the program so that this hospital became a training center? Healthcare workers from other institutions could come here to observe and learn. You could continue your work here while also teaching others." The idea clearly intrigued Fatima, but she still looked hesitant. "Let me think about it," she said. "This is a big decision." "Of course," Traoré agreed. "Take all the time you need. But I hope you'll consider it seriously. I believe that what you do here could transform healthcare throughout Burkina Faso." As the afternoon moved toward evening, Traoré realized that he had learned more about leadership, healthcare, and transformation in this single day than in many formal meetings. Real transformation didn't come from top-down directives, though those could be helpful. It came from individuals like Fatima who understood their work as service, who treated every interaction as an opportunity to affirm human dignity. "I need to ask you something," he said to Fatima. "Why did you share your story with me today?" Fatima considered the question carefully. "Because you asked the right questions," she said finally. "Most visitors want to see statistics, equipment, procedures. You wanted to understand how healing really happens. And because Jean-Baptiste has taught me that sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we don't plan for."
Jean-Baptiste grinned.
"She's been teaching me about authentic leadership my whole life. Today she got to practice it with someone who might be able to amplify its impact." As they walked toward the hospital exit, Traoré found himself thinking about the responsibilities that came with his position. He had the power to implement policies and allocate resources. But today had shown him that the most important work of transformation might be much more subtle and personal. "Fatima," he said as they reached the entrance, "will you accept my invitation?" She was quiet for a long moment, looking back at the hospital that had been her workplace and calling for 15 years. "Yes," she said finally, "but with conditions."
"What conditions?"
"First, that we never lose sight of the fact that this work is about individual human beings, not about systems or statistics. Second, that we always remember that the best ideas often come from the people doing the work, not from the people making the policies." "And third?" Traoré asked. Fatima looked at Jean-Baptiste. "Third, that we create pathways for young people like Jean-Baptiste, people who understand both competence and compassion, to become the healthcare leaders our country needs." Traoré extended his hand to Fatima, then embraced her in the traditional greeting of respect and friendship. "We have an agreement," he said, "and we have work to do." As his convoy prepared to leave, Traoré took one last look at the hospital. From the outside, it looked the same as it had that morning. But now he saw it differently. He saw it as a place where healing happened through human connection. He saw it as a community where people like Fatima created cultures of dignity and hope. He saw it as a model that could be replicated throughout Burkina Faso. As the vehicles pulled away, Traoré reflected on the lessons of the day. He had come expecting to inspect a healthcare facility. Instead, he had discovered a masterclass in transformational leadership, a living example of how change happens one relationship at a time. The story of Fatima and Jean-Baptiste would stay with him, not just as a touching personal narrative, but as a blueprint for the kind of country he was working to build, a place where every person's dignity was honored, where service was valued over status, and where love and commitment could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. The cleaning lady who had lost a daughter and gained a son had become a teacher for an entire nation. And the young man who had been abandoned by circumstances but embraced by love was on his way to becoming the kind of doctor who would honor both the science and the art of healing.